Justice is not heavy because of the law books. It is heavy because every person who walks into my courtroom carries a life I cannot afford to treat lightly. There are days when the bench feels like oak and brass and habit. Then there are days when it feels like the last thin door between a frightened human being and a person who thinks power is the same thing as permission. This story began on one of those days. If you want the truth of what power looks like when it thinks nobody can stop it, stay with me right now. I do not tell stories like this often, but this one deserves a witness, and today I am choosing you. On Monday, 14th October 2024, I unlocked my chambers at Belford Municipal Court on East Main Street in Belford, Ohio, at 6:08 that morning. Rain tapped the courthouse windows in a thin gray rhythm, and the old boiler made the hall smell faintly of steam and metal. I had my coffee black in the same plain white mug I had used for years. My father, who practiced law until his hands shook too much to hold a pen, used to tell me that judges should arrive before the building wakes up because harm never sleeps in. I had been on that bench for 28 years by then, and routine mattered to me. I read the overnight filings before the first clerk came in. I checked the handwritten notes I kept tucked inside each day's docket. I stood for a moment at my office window and watched rainwater gather in the cracks of the courthouse steps. Little things like that settle me. They remind me that justice is built from patient habits, not grand speeches. My clerk, Lila Chen, met me at 6:24 with the Monday stack pressed to her chest. Lila had worked with me for 11 years, long enough to know when to speak first and when to let me read. She did not smile that morning. She set the top file on my desk and said, "Judge, you should look at this before anything else." I read the caption once, then again, City of Belford v. Tristan Vale Mercer, case 24 CRB 441, with a related traffic file numbered 24 TRD 1187 clip behind it. Captain Tristan Vale Mercer of the Belford Police Department had been arrested late Friday night and brought in for Saturday video arraignment. He was 46 years old, decorated, admired in town, followed online by more people than some mayors ever speak to, and according to the file, he was charged with reckless operation, criminal damaging, and menacing. At his arraignment on Saturday, 12th October 2024, he had pleaded not guilty with a smile on his face and requested a speedy hearing so he could clear his name before the week was out. At the bond hearing that same day, I had set a $20,000 surety bond and ordered no contact with the complaining witness. Lila reminded me that his lawyer had spent half of Sunday trying to push for a continuance. The complaining witness was Rosa Elena Delgado, 41 years old. Night shift emergency department nurse at St. Agnes Regional Medical Center, 19 years on the job. Single mother to a 14-year-old boy named Mateo. Primary caregiver for her diabetic mother, Elena Delgado, age 68. Her car, a 2012 Honda Civic with 182,000 miles, had been struck in a pharmacy lot at 10:47 p.m. on Friday, 11th October 2024. She alleged Mercer had threatened her in that same lot after the collision. When I read those 2 pages, something in me sharpened. Cases that look small on paper sometimes carry the deepest bruise. What the file did not show, but Rosa later told us, mattered just as much. She had rented the same 2-bedroom apartment on Cypress Court for 9 years. Mateo slept in the smaller room by the heater because winter made his chest tight. Elena slept in the living room alcove where Rosa could hear if her blood sugar dropped in the night. Rosa kept a plastic envelope in the kitchen drawer with every bill sorted by due date. And on the Friday Mercer hit her car, there were exactly $143.22 left in her checking account until the next hospital deposit. When people talk about damage, they often mean metal. I have learned to ask what else was carrying the weight. Lila added one more thing before she left my desk. 3 reporters already called for seats, she said. And 1 person from the mayor's office asked if the hearing could be moved upstairs because of the crowd. I told her no. Courtroom 2 would do just fine. My father taught me early that rules without heart become weapons, and that the courtroom is the last place on earth where every single person must stand equal. Not equal in income, not equal in influence, equal in dignity. By 8:41, the gallery had started to fill. My bailiff, Vernon Price, checked the back doors, adjusted the rail, and made sure the witness microphone worked. The room had that electric stillness some courtrooms get before an ugly truth comes to light. Not loud, not restless, just watchful. A courtroom can become its own living thing on days like that. It listens before people do. At 9 or sharp, Vernon called, "All rise," and I took the bench. We handled noise complaints, one probation review, a plea agreement on a broken storefront window, and a license suspension matter, while courtroom 2 filled beyond what it usually held on a wet Monday. By 9:37, even the standing rail in the back had people leaning on it. I felt the Mercer file waiting on my right hand like a live wire. Captain Mercer entered at 9:42. He looked less like a defendant than a man arriving to inspect a property he believed already belonged to him. He wore a charcoal Tom Ford suit cut close through the shoulders, a pale gray silk tie, and an Hermes belt that flashed under the courtroom lights when he sat. On his left wrist was a steel Rolex Submariner. In his right hand, he carried a Louis Vuitton document case. His shoes were polished black and expensive enough that they probably cost more than Rosa Delgado spent on groceries in a month. If you have ever seen someone confuse rank with character, then you know the look he gave that room. He did not look nervous. He looked mildly offended to be there at all. His lawyer, Grant Pollard, followed him in, clean and careful and serious in the way seasoned defense lawyers often are. Pollard asked for a continuance before we even called the matter, citing media attention and scheduling strain. I denied it. The witnesses were present. The officers were present. The complaining witness was present. And the defendant himself had asked for speed. Then I saw Rosa. She sat in the front row with a plain manila folder in both hands, wearing light blue scrubs under a navy cardigan that had gone soft at the cuffs from too many washes. Her shoes were simple black slip-ons, and the back of the right heel leaned inward from years of long shifts. A silver cross rested at the base of her throat. Her hair was pulled back without much thought, and there was a crease between her brows that looked less like fear and more like fatigue that had settled into bone. There is a kind of strength that never announces itself. Rosa had that. She was not dramatic. She was not angry in the way people expect a victim to be. She looked like a woman who had been carrying other people for a very long time and had finally reached the point where she could no longer pretend being hit by one more load did not hurt. When Mercer glanced at her, he did not see a person. He saw an obstacle that had failed to move. I want to ask you something softly here because this matters more than some people realize. Have you ever known someone who kept a whole family standing while the world barely noticed the work? If you have, then you already understand why Rosa Delgado had my respect before she ever raised her right hand to testify. The city prosecutor, Marisol Vega, called Officer Miguel Santos first. Badge 417, age 29, Patrol Division. He took the oath with a stiffness that told me he understood exactly what it meant to testify against a captain in his own department. He had been dispatched at 10:49 p.m. on Friday, 11 October 2024, to Marlowe Pharmacy, 816 West Juniper Avenue, Belford, Ohio, on a report of a vehicle strike, a disturbance, and possible threats. Officer Santos arrived at 10:56 p.m. The lot was wet, but not flooded. He found a black 2023 Porsche Cayenne Turbo GT angled across two spaces near the west curb line and a gray 2012 Honda Civic with major rear driver's side damage pushed partly against the curb. Broken red plastic from a taillight lay in a fan shape across the pavement. A pharmacy bag had split near the passenger side of the Honda, and one white medication box had gone soft in the rain. When Santos approached, Rosa Delgado was standing by the driver door with a scrape across the base of her left thumb and rain in her hair. Captain Mercer was by the Porsche with his phone in one hand and his badge wallet in the other. Santos said the first thing Mercer offered was not a license, not insurance, but department credentials. That detail told me plenty all by itself. Men who believe the uniform should shield them often reach for it before they reach for the truth. I asked Officer Santos whether the defendant said anything in his presence. He looked at his notes and answered carefully. "Yes, Your Honor." He said, "This woman is making drama out of a parking mistake." Then he said to Ms. Delgado, "At approximately 11:03 p.m., you should have stayed in your lane." At that, Rosa's fingers tightened around the edge of her folder. Mercer sat back with one ankle across his knee, as if he were forced to listen to a very dull lecture. Sergeant Alicia Kern testified next. Badge 233, shift supervisor. She arrived at 11:02 p.m. and observed the same basic scene, but she added that the Porsche hood was still warm enough to steam in the rain. She also stated that the height of the front bumper damage matched the scrape on Rosa's Civic. More important, Sergeant Kern testified that Mercer attempted twice to handle the matter administratively, which everyone in the room understood to mean he expected his title to solve what his conduct had created. Rosa Delgado took the stand at 10:18 that morning, and the whole courtroom leaned in without meaning to. She gave sworn testimony in a voice so calm, I had to remind myself that calm does not mean unhurt. She had left St. Agnes Regional Medical Center at 10:12 p.m. after a double shift because another emergency nurse had called off and the waiting room was full. She drove straight to Marlow Pharmacy to pick up insulin pens and blood pressure tablets for her mother and a rescue inhaler refill for Mateo, who had mild asthma. The total was 72 at 18. She remembered because she had stood at the counter trying to decide whether she could wait until Tuesday to fill one of her own prescriptions for tendinitis. She walked out to the Civic carrying the paper bag in her right hand. She had just opened the driver door and set the bag on the passenger seat when she heard tires move quickly over wet pavement behind her. She turned. The black Porsche came toward her from the far end of the lot. It did not slow until after impact. The force shoved the Civic forward into the curb. The bag fell. The medication spilled. Her phone hit the asphalt and skidded under the car. She looked at Mercer then, standing with expensive rain on his Tom Ford sleeve, and told me the thing she could not forget was not the sound of the crash, it was the look on his face. Look. He looked satisfied, she said, like he had finished something. The gallery shifted as one body. I watched Mercer's expression. He stared back at her with the empty patience of a man convinced that truth was still negotiable. Marisol Vega asked Rosa what happened next. Rosa said Mercer stepped out of the Porsche, looked at her, and did not ask if she was hurt. He did not apologize. He said, "I told you at St. Agnes to keep your mouth closed." Pollard objected. I overruled him. Rosa continued. She said she answered, "I'm a nurse. I write what I see." Then Mercer stepped closer and said, "Not if you know what's good for your family." That line landed like a dropped pane of glass. If you think you already know where this story is going, I want to challenge you to stay with me a little longer. By that point, I knew the crash was not random, but I still did not know how far this man had reached or how many people had been forced to step aside so his power could feel safe. Rosa explained the reference to St. Agnes. On Wednesday, 3rd July 2024, at 2:23 a.m., a 22-year-old man named Andre Bennett had been brought into the emergency department from police custody. Rosa was one of the nurses on intake. Andre had bruising over the ribs, swelling around his right eye, shallow breathing, and a note in the transfer paperwork that did not match the urgency of his condition. Rosa documented what she saw, as she had done for 19 years. She also documented that a supervising officer in plain clothes kept asking staff whether they were done yet. Later, through hospital gossip and then through formal review, she learned that officer was Captain Tristan Mercer. Andre Bennett died on Sunday, 7th of July, 2024 at 6:14 p.m. Rosa never claimed she knew everything that happened to him. She only knew what she had seen. She had charted it carefully. She had refused to alter it when a later phone call from an unknown man suggested she should clean up language that invites confusion. After that came 3 blocked calls with no words at all, just breathing. Pollard moved to dismiss the menacing count for lack of corroboration. I denied the motion to dismiss. There was probable cause and then some. What none of us yet understood was how Mercer had found Rosa in that pharmacy lot on that exact night, unless this had never been chance to begin with. The question sat in the room like a second witness. We took a 10-minute recess at 10:56. In chambers, I read the supplemental reports again. One detail held me by the throat. At 9:58 p.m. on 11 October, 49 minutes before the collision, a law enforcement database search had been run on Rosa Delgado's license plate and registered address from a mobile terminal assigned to Captain Mercer's unit. That one entry changed the shape of the case in my mind. A man does not search a woman's plate, then coincidentally smash into her car at a pharmacy less than an hour later. When we resumed, Marisol Vega called Nia Renee Turner, age 19, a part-time cashier and pharmacy tech trainee at Marlow. Nia wore her work badge on a lanyard and looked like she wished she were anywhere else in the world, but she told the truth plainly. She had seen Rosa leave the store with the medications. She had also seen the black Porsche sitting near the far hedge with the headlights off for close to a minute before the impact. She remembered because it gave her a bad feeling. Nia said the Porsche rolled through the lot once, then circled back. After the collision, she saw the driver get out and point two fingers at Rosa in a little pistol shape. Pollard asked if the gesture could have meant something else. Nia answered, "Not with his face, sir." There are moments in a courtroom when a witness says exactly the one sentence the room needed. That was one of them. At 11:22 a.m., Marisol Vega called one more witness before lunch, a man named Harold Beasley, age 63, a retired postal carrier who lived 2 blocks from Marlowe Pharmacy. Mr. Beasley had been sitting in his tan Ford Ranger at the far end of the lot, eating a gas station sandwich after visiting his wife in memory care on Linden Avenue. He testified that he saw the Porsche pause with its lights off, then surge forward. "That driver lined it up," he said. "I drove mail in ice storms for 30 years. I know a skid, that was no skid." He also remembered Mercer saying, "Maybe now you'll listen," after the impact. "If you have stayed this far into my story, then you are part of something I still think this country needs very badly. You are part of the quiet group of people who have not given up on the idea that ordinary truth matters. Hold that close as I keep going, because what came next tested that belief harder than anything earlier had." Then came the pharmacy security footage. The prosecutor laid chain of custody through the store manager's affidavit and the digital extraction log. At 11:11 a.m., the clip played on the courtroom monitor. The frame showed Space 14, Rosa's Civic, the wet shine of the lot, and the West Drive entrance. At 10:47:02 p.m., the Porsche entered, slowed, and rolled past her. At 10:47:41, it came back faster. No brake lights until after contact. The impact shook the camera. Rosa stumbled backward into the open driver door. There was another small detail from the pharmacy footage that did not strike the room at first and then would not leave it alone. In the lower left corner of the frame, just before the Porsche accelerated, Rosa's reflection flashed in the store glass. She was half-turned, one hand still on the open driver door, not moving into traffic, not backing out, not doing anything that could have confused another driver. She was exactly where a careful man would have seen her. When that still image froze on the screen, even Grant Pollard stopped taking notes for a breath. Sometimes a case turns not on noise, but on one plain frame no honest person can explain away. You can tell a great deal about intent by the way a vehicle moves. Every driver knows the difference between sliding and choosing. Wesley Boone from Boone Collision later testified the Porsche had been moving between 22 and 26 miles per hour at impact based on crush depth, paint transfer, and frame bend. His repair estimate for the Civic was $8,946.17, which might not sound like much to a man with a Porsche and a Rolex, but to Rosa, it was the difference between survival and collapse. I need you to picture that old Civic clearly. It was not just a car. It was how Rosa got from Cypress Court to St. Agnes for the night shift at 6:20 p.m. It was how she took her mother to Dr. Haskell's office on Pine Street every other Thursday. It was how she got Mateo to school, to the grocery store, and home again. Some people's whole life sits on 4 worn tires and a gas tank they pray will make it to payday. We broke for lunch at 12:31 p.m. As I stood, Mercer muttered not quietly enough, "This is a circus over a dented Civic." Rosa heard him. So did I. So did enough of the room that Vernon Price turned his head toward the defense table before I even looked up. Mercer still did not appear worried. He appeared annoyed that ordinary facts were taking this long to move out of his way. Before I tell you what came after lunch, take 1 second and look at your own life. Think about the last person you saw doing hard work while somebody richer treated that work like it did not count. That is the fault line this whole case sat on. Court resumed at 1:14 p.m. and the weather outside had turned colder. The edges of the east windows had begun to fog. Marisol Vega called Omar Kilpatrick, digital forensics analyst with the city's Civilian Technology Office. Omar was 34, soft-spoken, and precise. He brought a laptop, a printed report, and the kind of patience that makes dishonesty feel very lonely. Omar testified that on Saturday, 12th of October 2024, at 8:42 a.m., he received a preservation request for public social media content connected to Captain Mercer. Using certified forensic capture software, he preserved several posts and stories from Mercer's public Instagram account, Captain Vale Official. Before deletion, he recorded the hash values, tagged the files DK22411, and maintained a clean chain of custody. Pollard tried to shake the foundation, but Omar answered every question as if he had built the road himself and was happy to walk us across it. At 1:26 p.m., the first Instagram story appeared on the monitor. It had been posted at 11:16 p.m. on Friday, 11 October 2024, 29 minutes after the collision. The clip was 8 seconds long. It showed the inside of a vehicle, rain on the windshield, the edge of a black steering wheel, and Mercer's left hand resting near the dash. The steel Rolex was visible. So was the red glint of broken plastic near the front hood line. Text ran across the bottom in white letters over a dark filter. When people forget their place, I help them remember. Underneath were 3 hashtags, or stay in your lane, Wang Captain Knows, Wang Belford After Dark. The timestamp sat in the top corner plain as daylight. Rosa lowered her eyes to her folded hands. Wesley Boone stared at the screen with his jaw set. Even the reporters stopped writing for a second. Omar then displayed a second story captured at 11:18 p.m., deleted later that same night at 11:41. In that clip, Mercer's own voice said, low and amused, "Some lessons cost more than others." You could hear rain. You could hear a turn signal click twice. You could hear contempt. Pollard argued somebody else could have had the phone. Omar answered that the story upload matched Mercer's authenticated account, device ID, and home network pattern from prior posts. The explanations available to the defense were shrinking fast. At 1:52 p.m., the prosecutor introduced a printed Snapchat screenshot supplied by Nia Turner after she remembered it during the lunch break. It had been posted from Mercer's public story at 11:21 p.m. and captured by Nia before deletion because, in her words, "It made my stomach go weird." The image showed the Porsche hood under rain and the caption, "Rich people problems require creative solutions," followed by a laughing emoji and a steering wheel emoji. Omar Kilpatrick matched the screenshot metadata to Mercer's account archive. It was childish, cruel, and far more revealing than Mercer understood. Arrogant people often think jokes hide intent. In court, jokes usually uncover it. Captain Mercer changed before my eyes in those minutes. The easy arrogance did not vanish all at once. It hardened. His mouth tightened. He leaned toward Pollard. He stopped looking at Rosa and started looking at the exits. That is another thing 28 years on the bench teaches you. Some people fear guilt. Others fear exposure. They are not the same thing at all. The city then called Celia Monroe, RN, age 56, compliance supervisor at St. Agnes. She confirmed that Rosa Delgado had been listed as a fact witness in the hospital's internal review tied to the treatment and death of Andre Bennett. Rosa's charting from 3rd July documented visible injuries, delayed transport concerns, and the presence of a supervising officer pressing staff to move faster. Andre's family had since retained counsel. The state attorney general's office had made preliminary inquiries. The matter was larger than rumor now. Celia also produced access logs showing 2 attempts in late September by an outside law enforcement supervisor to obtain Rosa Delgado's personnel contact sheet through a hospital channel not open to him. Both requests were denied. The name logged on each request was Captain Tristan Mercer. He had no lawful treatment role, no employment oversight, and no legitimate purpose for requesting that file. He wanted her location, her phone number, and probably a route to her door. There was one more piece of paper in Celia Monroe's folder, and she almost forgot to mention it until Marisol Vega asked whether St. Agnes had logged any outside contact with Rosa at home. Celia said yes. On Tuesday, 1st October 2024, at 7:14 p.m., hospital security received a report from Rosa that a black SUV had idled across from her apartment building for nearly 20 minutes. Mateo had looked through the blinds and copied part of the plate on the back of a math worksheet. Agent Reeve later confirmed that partial plate matched a city-issued unmarked Tahoe assigned to Mercer's command pool. That was the moment the whole room understood he had not merely frightened Rosa once. He had been circling her life. That was when the emotional weather of the room changed. Until then, someone determined to protect Mercer could still tell themselves this was a parking lot case inflated by politics. But now the line from Andre Bennett's death to Rosa Delgado's damaged car lay in plain view. A nurse had charted what she saw. A captain had tried to find her. Then he found her. I have to ask you to do something right here. Look at your own life for a second. Ask yourself what happens to a town when the people who tell the truth start wondering whether their children, their mothers, or their front doors are safe. That question is bigger than one courtroom, and it was sitting with us now. At 2:07 p.m., as Celia stepped down, Mercer turned his head and looked straight at Rosa. Not glanced, looked. I warned him once to face forward. He did for a moment. Then, while Pollard sorted papers and the room settled, Mercer leaned half back in his chair and said in a low voice, "You should have taken the transfer money." He misjudged two things. He misjudged how quiet the room had become, and he forgot the defense table microphone was live. The words came through the overhead speaker with ugly clarity. Lila Chen froze over the keyboard. Rosa's shoulders stiffened. Vernon Price moved before I spoke. "Stop," I said, and my voice cracked through the room like a board struck hard. Everything halted. Pollard went pale. Mercer looked up at the speaker, then at me, and for the first time that day, I saw uncertainty flicker across his face. I ordered the recording preserved, the witness room cleared, and Rosa brought no closer to the defense table than absolutely necessary. I asked her carefully whether she had heard the statement. She nodded once and said, "Yes, Your Honor. He offered me money in September to leave St. Agnes and not speak about Andre Bennett." Pollard tried to object. Mercer snapped before he could. He stood with one hand flat on the table and said, "This little court is not fit to judge me." Then he looked up at me and went further. "You handle barking dogs and parking tickets in a worn robe and call it justice. I run the people who keep this city alive. I have heard many insults in my years. Drunk men say foolish things. Angry litigants lash out. But this was not heat. It was belief. He believed a municipal court was beneath him because the people in it were beneath him. He believed the work of ordinary justice was too small to restrain a man like him. Silence filled courtroom 2 so fully it felt like a wall. I could hear the faint buzz from the clerk's monitor and rain tapping against the far window. Nobody coughed. Nobody shifted. Even Mercer seemed to hear what he had just exposed about himself. I found him in direct contempt of court on the spot. I revoked his bond pending further hearing. Then I did something I had done only once before in 28 years on the bench. I recessed the courtroom, stepped into chambers, closed the door, and called the FBI. "You tell me something, and tell me true in your own heart. Do you still believe real justice is possible when the person abusing power wears the uniform meant to protect it?" I needed the answer to be yes that day. And before I walked back out, I made sure the law had every chance to prove it. My call connected at 2:23 p.m. to Supervisory Special Agent Dana Reeve at the Cleveland field office. I gave her my name, my court, the case number, and the shortest clean summary I could manage. Belford Police Captain, in open court threat to a hospital witness, prior access attempts, plate search, connection to the death of Andre Bennett. She let me finish, then asked one question first. "Is Rosa Delgado safe right now?" I told her yes, under court protection with my bailiff, and I heard something shift in her voice. Agent Reeves said her office had an active obstruction review involving Captain Mercer and witness contacts tied to the Bennett matter. She instructed me to preserve the audio feed, all digital exhibits, and the live transcript. Then she said she and another agent were 28 minutes away. That was the moment I understood we were standing on a seam in the ground that had been cracking long before Monday morning. When I returned to the bench at 2:31, Mercer no longer looked like a man attending a nuisance hearing. His tie had shifted half an inch. A vein pulsed once at the side of his neck. Pollard requested a continuance. I denied anything beyond the short recess needed to receive federal authorities. Rosa was taken to the witness room with Vernon Price and victim advocate Tasha Bell. I went there myself, not to coach, not to comfort improperly, but because protection in a courthouse is not an abstract idea to me. Rosa sat upright in a metal chair with both hands locked together. There was a red line where the edge of her folder had pressed into her thumb. I asked only one question. "Do you need medical care?" She shook her head and answered, "No, Judge. I need this to stop." That sentence hit me harder than any tearful speech could have. Good people usually ask for less than the pain done to them. At 3:42 p.m., Agent Dana Reeve entered Courtroom 2 with Special Agent Mark Ellis beside her. She wore a dark blue suit, no nonsense in the face, silver hair clipped back. He carried a slim case file and moved with the stillness of someone used to tense rooms. The atmosphere changed the moment they crossed the rail. Authority does that when it comes in clean. I placed Agent Reeve under oath. She testified that the FBI had been reviewing allegations of witness interference, unauthorized data access, and possible obstruction tied to the custody chain surrounding Andre Bennett's death. Captain Mercer's name had surfaced in database irregularities, attempted civilian contacts, and unexplained location overlap with at least 2 non-police witnesses. Rosa Delgado, she confirmed, had been designated a protected material witness in the federal review as of 9 October 2024, 5 days before our hearing. Then Agent Reeve delivered the fact that changed the feeling of the whole room. On Friday, 11 October 2024, at 10:21 p.m., Captain Mercer's personal phone pinged from a cellular tower sector less than 300 yards from Rosa Delgado's apartment complex on Cypress Court. At 10:33 p.m., traffic camera stills placed his black Porsche on Pine Street, heading west toward Juniper Avenue. At 10:47 p.m., pharmacy video captured the impact. This was no chance encounter after a fundraiser. He had gone looking for her. Mercer's face went white in a way expensive skincare cannot fix. Pollard asked for a sidebar. I granted it. He whispered hard, trying to salvage what he could. Mercer did not answer him at first. He was staring at the wood grain of the defense table as though it might open and give him somewhere to go. Men who build themselves on status often come apart not when accused, but when they realize evidence has stopped admiring them. Agent Reeve was not done. She testified that on 18 September 2024 and again on 27 September 2024, a restricted law enforcement intelligence terminal registered inquiries linked to witness scheduling around St. Agnes personnel. The inquiry path corresponded to a supervisor credential assigned to Mercer's division. One protected witness in the Bennett matter, orderly Samuel Price, had reported finding the tires on his pickup slashed on 29th September. Another admissions clerk, Tiana Brooks, had received a message reading, "You don't know enough to act brave." Both incidents were under review. Rosa Delgado was not the first witness touched by fear. After Agent Reeve finished, Special Agent Mark Ellis was sworn for a limited point, and his voice was so flat it made the facts heavier. He testified that an audio enhancement of the pharmacy scene, pulled from a nearby city traffic microphone at Juniper and West Street, had picked up part of the exchange after the crash. At 10:48:13 p.m., a male voice identified as Mercer's by preliminary review said, "Your chart should have died with him." Then a female voice answered, "I told the truth." I have heard many hard things in court. That one made the room feel suddenly smaller, as if every wall had moved in an inch. That was the hidden, deeper truth. What had walked into my courtroom as a local menacing case was actually part of a pattern. A captain had not just tried to frighten one nurse. He had used the gravity of his office to bend the people around a death in custody. The damage was not only a crushed quarter panel and wet insulin on the pavement, the damage was civic. It spread like oil through trust. I need you to sit still for the next part because it mattered then and it matters now. Stop everything in your mind for a moment and really listen. The law is never more fragile than when a witness starts wondering whether truth will cost their family safety. Marisol Vega then asked Rosa if she wished to make a brief victim impact statement before I ruled on the contempt finding and the city charges then ripe for disposition. Pollard objected to timing. I overruled him within limits. Rosa took the stand again. Her blue scrubs were wrinkled now from a full day in and out of that room. She held no notes. She said she had worked 19 years in emergency medicine. She had seen overdoses, gunshots, car wrecks, and heart attacks. She had washed blood from shoes before driving Mateo to school the next morning because nursing did not stop just because your own body had enough. She told me she was not brave in the way people imagine. I was tired, she said. I just wrote what I saw because a young man came in hurt, and if I stop writing what I see, I stop being a nurse. There was nothing theatrical in it, which is why it landed so hard. Then she said the line that silenced even the reporters. When he hit my car, I thought about the insulin in that bag before I thought about myself. That is what my life is, Your Honor, keeping other people breathing. Mercer shut his eyes. Not from remorse, I think, from the sound of a truth too plain to dodge. Wesley Boone shifted on the back bench and looked down. Nia Turner wiped at one eye with the heel of her hand. Vernon Price stood straighter by the rail. Lila Chen stopped typing for half a second and took a breath. Courtroom 2 had become more than a room by then. It was a chest holding one long breath none of us were ready to let out. Pollard, to his credit, finally seemed to understand the ground beneath him had changed. He asked for a private conference with his client. I gave them 8 minutes. When they returned, he told me Mercer would withdraw his motion for a continuance, stipulate to the authenticity of the digital evidence, and enter no contest pleas to reckless operation and criminal damaging. On menacing, he wished to proceed to finding. On contempt, he wished to be heard. Mercer himself remained standing, jaw hard, eyes down. I accepted the no contest pleas after a full colloquy. I found him guilty on reckless operation and criminal damaging based on the facts and exhibits. On the menacing count, I made my finding from the bench. The threat in the lot, the witness targeting, the plate search, and the live court statement left no reasonable doubt in my mind. Guilty. As to contempt of court, the conduct occurred in my presence, on the record, and with direct interference in the administration of justice. Guilty there as well. Sentencing began at 4:58 p.m. I took my time. Judges who rush hard moments usually do it because they fear the responsibility of inhabiting them. I looked at Mercer first. The Tom Ford suit still fit him. The Rolex still shone. But wealth had stopped protecting him from the plain geometry of consequence. I looked at Rosa next. Her hands were folded over that bent manila folder as if she needed one object in the world to remain under control. I thought of my father standing at our kitchen table in a brown cardigan, explaining to me when I was 16 that law without moral courage is just procedure wearing a tie. I thought of every small case I had heard for 28 years, barking dogs, parking tickets, shoplifting, broken windows, lost tempers, rent disputes, the so-called little work of a municipal judge. All of it mattered because every one of those files trained the heart to recognize human worth when a larger storm arrived. Before I gave sentence, I told the room something I still believe with all I have left in me. Power, I said, does not become respectable because it wears a badge, a silk tie, or a title. Power becomes respectable only when it restrains itself for the sake of people who cannot fight it alone. The smallest courtroom in a city is still large enough to tell the truth. I saw one reporter write that down word for word. Then I sentenced him on reckless operation, 90 days in the county jail with 60 suspended, 30 to serve. On criminal damaging, 180 days with 90 suspended, 90 to serve, consecutive to the reckless operation term. On menacing, 180 days with 120 suspended, 60 to serve, consecutive. On direct contempt of court, 30 days to serve consecutive. Total active sentence, 210 days in county custody, fine of $2,500 plus costs. Full restitution to Rosa Delgado in the amount of $8,146.17 for vehicle repair, $72.18 for destroyed medication, $486 for tow and temporary transport, and lost wage reimbursement of $1,140 due within 90 days or converted to civil judgment. I also imposed 5 years of supervised probation on release. No contact with Rosa Delgado, her family, or any witness tied to the Bennett matter, and an order prohibiting him from possessing or accessing any law enforcement database pending state decertification review. I directed the clerk to transmit certified copies of the full record, including the contempt audio and all exhibits, to the county prosecutor, the Ohio Attorney General's office, and the FBI before close of business. This was not revenge. It was a clean chain of consequence tied to the harm done. Then I added the part that made the sentence fit the wound. As a condition of probation, if released into community supervision, Mercer would complete 300 hours of service, not in uniform and not in any command role, at St. Agnes Regional Medical Center's Patient Transport and Family Assistance Unit, subject to hospital approval, and only after federal authorities cleared any conflict. He would move wheelchairs, carry discharge bags, and sit with families waiting on hard news. He had used position to make ordinary vulnerability feel small. I wanted the law to force him to stand in service of the vulnerable, if the law ever gave him that chance. A sentence is only just when it answers the harm in human terms. He had struck the vehicle that held a family together, so he would pay every dollar back. He had threatened a witness who protected a dying patient by telling the truth. So he would lose freedom, lose authority, and face institutions larger than his own. He had mocked the court as small, so the smallest court in the city would be the first place to teach him the size of accountability. Mercer's reaction came in stages. First disbelief, then heat, then the odd, empty look I have seen on men when the scaffolding of self-image falls all at once. "You can't do this," he said before Pollard touched his sleeve and whispered for silence. Vernon Price stepped forward. The steel bite of handcuffs sounded louder than usual that afternoon, perhaps because everyone in the room knew that sound had traveled a long way to reach his wrists. Rosa did not cry. She pressed her lips together and bowed her head for one moment. That was all. Nia Turner covered her mouth. Wesley Boone nodded once, as if a bolt had finally been tightened the right way. Lila Chen's hands moved fast over the keys, documenting the formal close of a day that had long since left ordinary court business behind. In the back row, I saw two off-duty officers staring at the floor, each thinking his own private thought about what loyalty means when the wrong man wears the stripe. If you still believe that dignity matters more than image, even when image has money and followers behind it, mark this moment in your own heart. A courtroom does not save a town every day, but on some days it reminds a town what saving ought to look like. After I concluded sentencing, Agent Reeve asked leave to place a short statement on the record. I granted it. She stated that federal authorities would be seeking immediate preservation of all Belford Police Department communication logs tied to Mercer's division, and that any attempt by any person to contact Rosa Delgado or other protected witnesses would be treated as possible obstruction. That warning landed with enough force that even the gallery seemed to sit straighter. Mercer was led toward the side door. Just before he passed through it, he turned once, not toward me, but toward Rosa. There was no threat left in his face then, only the cold hollow of a man meeting a limit he had not believed existed. Vernon angled his body between them. The door closed. The sound was soft. Final things often are. The courtroom emptied in pieces, reporters first, then officers, then the curious public who had come because they smelled scandal and left carrying something closer to a lesson. Rosa remained seated for a moment as if her body had not yet received word that it was allowed to stand. I waited until almost everyone was gone. Judges do not usually step down into the well after sentencing, but some days call for simple human gravity. I came down from the bench and stopped at the rail, no closer than propriety allowed. Rosa rose. Up close, I could see the fatigue under her eyes, the faint mark where her mask usually sat through long hospital nights, and the small, stubborn steadiness that had carried her all day. I said, "Ms. Delgado, the clerk will help with the restitution order and transport paperwork." She nodded and said, "Thank you, Judge." Then she added very softly, "I kept hearing my father say, 'Don't make trouble.' But my son said if I changed the chart, then I would know I changed it forever." That one nearly broke me in the place inside where judges keep their private weather. I told her, "Your son was right." She gave the smallest sad smile I have ever seen, gathered her bent folder, and left with Tasha Bell under Vernon's watch. I will admit something to you here that I would never have said from the bench. When the side door closed and I was alone in chambers at 6:11 p.m., I sat down with my cold coffee still on the desk and let my hands shake for a full minute. Have you ever held yourself together so tightly for so long that the shaking only comes when nobody is looking? That is how that evening found me. The weeks after that hearing were quieter on the surface and louder underneath. The Belford Police Department placed Mercer on immediate administrative leave that same night. By Thursday, 17th October 2024, the Ohio Peace Officer Training Commission opened decertification proceedings. On Monday, 21st October, the county prosecutor announced additional review of unauthorized database access. 2 days later, the city manager accepted the retirement of Belford's police chief, who claimed he had no knowledge of Mercer's witness contacts. Whether he knew or merely failed to see what was growing inside his own department, the effect on the city was the same. On 4 November 2024, Rosa Delgado received the first restitution payment through the clerk's office. It covered the tow bill, the destroyed medication, and a portion of the repair cost. A local body shop owner matched the labor discount without publicity after learning who she was. The bus drivers on Route 6 let her slide twice while her car was still in the shop and she was short on exact fare. Small acts of decency began to gather around her case in ways she never asked for. On 12th of December 2024, almost 2 months after the hearing, Rosa sent a short note through the clerk's office with a receipt attached. She had used part of the restitution money to replace Mateo's inhaler machine, pay the past due gas bill of $317.44, and buy Elena a heavier winter blanket from the pharmacy aisle where she had once stood shaking. Her note was only 3 lines. It said, "Thank you for seeing the whole thing, not just the crash." That sentence stayed with me because it named the real work. A judge must see the whole thing or the law turns blind in the wrong places. Mateo wrote me a letter in careful blue ink on lined notebook paper. He said he was 14 and did not know how courts really worked until he watched mine online through a delayed feed after school. He said his mother had told him not to hate Captain Mercer because hate takes up room needed for breathing. Then he wrote, "Thank you for making him stop acting like rules are for people without nice watches." I still have that letter in the bottom drawer of my desk. The federal case moved more slowly, as federal cases do. In January 2025, Agent Reeve informed the court through formal notice that Mercer had been indicted on charges tied to witness tampering and obstruction connected to the Andre Bennett matter. 2 more officers from Belford later entered cooperation agreements. One had carried out a database search at Mercer's direction. The other admitted hearing Mercer joke that hospital staff were soft targets. That phrase sat in me like a nail. Andre Bennett's mother came to my courtroom once in March on an unrelated municipal matter involving a landlord dispute. She waited until everyone had left and simply said, "I know you could not bring my boy back, but thank you for not letting them crush every person who tried to tell the truth about him." I told her the only honest answer I had. I wish it had not taken so much pain to get here. She nodded because mothers understand the shape of that sentence better than most. By spring, Rosa's Civic was back on the road. Wesley Boone himself had replaced one of the bent supports without billing for his own labor. Mateo made honor roll that semester. Elena Delgado got her insulin on time. Rosa kept working nights at St. Agnes. She did not become a symbol. She did not go on television. She did not start speaking at civic luncheons. She went back to being exactly who she had been before, which in my mind made her courage even larger. Belford changed too, though not in the neat way newspapers like to pretend cities change. People were more wary, more watchful. A civilian review committee meeting that usually drew 12 tired attendees suddenly drew 83. 2 hospital workers who had stayed silent about prior pressure came forward to state investigators. The phrase "little court" started appearing in letters to the editor, but not as an insult, as a kind of challenge. People began asking what else the little court might still be brave enough to say aloud. If this story has stayed with you this far, then you understand why some people cannot afford to miss the next one I tell. Power almost never announces itself by saying, "I am dangerous." It says, "Trust me, I know better." And too many good people learn the truth only after the damage starts. On 2nd June 2025, almost 8 months after that hearing, I stopped at Miller's Diner on South Harbor Road at 6:35 a.m. on my way to court. I was early, as always. The waitress knew my coffee order without asking. While I stood at the register, someone beside me said, "Judge." I turned. It was Rosa, wearing a gray hoodie over scrubs, hair damp from the rain, eyes tired in the familiar way of nurses heading into one more shift. She looked healthier, if that is the word, not untouched. Nobody comes through a year like hers untouched, but steadier. The kind of steadiness that comes when fear no longer owns the hallway outside your apartment. She told me Mateo had made junior varsity soccer and that Elena was doing better since they got her medications regular again. Then she reached into her bag and handed me a folded card. Inside was a photograph of an old gray Civic parked under a cottonwood tree with a new rear panel and a small magnet on the back that read St. Agnes Night Shift. On the back of the photo she had written, "Still in my lane. Just not yours." I laughed right there at the diner counter, the first clean laugh that case ever gave me. She smiled, and for 1 second she looked younger than 41. Later that month, I learned Mercer had entered a federal plea agreement to 1 count of witness tampering and 1 count of obstruction. The plea required forfeiture of his pension enhancement, permanent decertification, and cooperation in the wider Bennett investigation. He would spend more time in custody beyond the sentence I gave him. I did not celebrate that. Judges should never enjoy another human being's fall. But I did receive it as confirmation that the truth had not died in my courtroom after all. My father used to tell me that the law is really a set of promises people make to strangers. I did not fully understand that when I was young. I do now. The promise is that your money will not weigh more than my oath. The promise is that your title will not outrank another person's safety. The promise is that when a nurse writes what she sees, a court will still know how to listen. That October day stayed with me because it stripped everything down to essentials. One man believed prestige would turn harm into inconvenience. One woman believed truth was part of her job, even when truth made her a target. A courtroom full of ordinary people watched those two beliefs collide. And for once, in a city that badly needed it, the right belief won. I think often about Rosa's sentence in the witness room. I need this to stop. There is wisdom in that plainness. Most decent people are not asking for glory. They are asking for enough safety to go to work, buy medicine, raise children, and come home without fear. When institutions forget that, they become hungry things. When courts remember it, even briefly, the whole civic body breathes easier. So if you take anything from my story, let it be this. Never call justice small because it happens in a modest room with old wood and flickering lights. Never mistake quiet people for weak ones. And never assume a person with a badge, a fine watch, and a crowd behind him has somehow outgrown the reach of consequence. Thank you for sitting with me through every hard turn of this day. I know what I asked you to carry was not light. If this story stayed under your skin, stay close. Because the next one I tell will show you another moment when a room full of strangers had to decide what kind of world they still wanted to live in. Some courts are small. Justice is not.